The morning of my wedding, I woke up and couldn't feel my left hand. Not numb the way a hand goes numb when you sleep on it wrong. Gone. Completely absent, like that part of my body had simply decided not to participate in the day. I lay in the hotel bed for 4 minutes, flexing fingers I couldn't feel, watching them move like they belonged to someone else, and I thought, of course today. I pressed the call button for my nurse aide, Dina, who had traveled from Portland specifically to help me dress. While I waited, I did the things Dr. Marcus Webb had taught me to do in the first 3 years after my diagnosis, when panic attacks used to swallow my mornings whole. I breathed in for 4 counts. I named 5 things I could see: the ceiling fan, the white carnation in the vase on the nightstand, my wedding dress hanging on the closet door, the morning light coming through the gap in the curtains, Dina's tote bag on the chair by the window. I breathed out for 6. By the time Dina knocked, sensation had returned to 3 fingers. By the time she helped me into my dress, all 5. That is what my mother has never understood and what she has never tried to understand. That this is not drama. This is not performance. This is simply Tuesday. Or in this case, Saturday. The most important Saturday of my life, and my nervous system was doing what it always does. Making negotiations I had no part in, following rules I did not write and cannot override. My name is Claire Renner. I am 32 years old. I have relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Diagnosed at 23 after 18 months of symptoms my family spent 18 months explaining away. I am a licensed occupational therapist. I have a master's degree. I own a condo in Portland, Oregon, that I purchased without help from anyone. I have a best friend named Josephine who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to sit with me during a bad episode because I had made the mistake of telling her where I was. I have a garden on my balcony where I grow tomatoes that are never quite as good as I want them to be but are better every year. And on the morning of October 14th, I was 3 hours away from marrying Daniel Okafor, the most patient and infuriating and kind man I have ever known, in a ceremony at Hartwell Chapel in Eugene, Oregon, surrounded by 87 people who loved us. My mother had been trying to ruin it for 8 months. I should explain my mother, not to excuse her because there is no excuse for what she did, but because she is not a monster in the way people imagine when they hear stories like this. She is something more complicated and in some ways more exhausting than a monster. She is a woman who has spent her entire adult life using other people's suffering as evidence of her own failure. Barbara Renner grew up the oldest of 5 children in a household where illness meant weakness and weakness meant burden, and burden was the worst thing you could be. Her mother, my grandmother Iris, who I adored and who died when I was 17, used to say that Barbara had been born apologizing for taking up space. She worked herself raw to be invisible in her needs and enormous in her usefulness, and when she married my father and had 2 daughters, she transferred that framework wholesale onto us. My sister Tricia got out early. Tricia is athletic, high-functioning, allergic to nothing, afraid of nothing, and built her life in Dallas in a way that required almost nothing from my parents emotionally. She was the model. I was the deviation. When my symptoms started at 22, the fatigue so heavy some mornings I could not lift my arms above my head, the visual disturbances, the pain that moved through my body like weather, my mother's first response was not concern. It was suspicion. I remember her standing in my apartment doorway the first time she came to check on me after I'd called in sick to work for 3 days, looking at me in my bed with that expression I would come to know like a language. The narrowed eyes, the slight tightening around the mouth, and saying, "You look fine to me." That was the beginning. Over the next 18 months, as I saw 11 different doctors and got 11 different non-answers and finally landed in Dr. Marcus Webb's neurology practice at OU, my mother built a parallel narrative. In her version, I was depressed. I was anxious. I was, at various times, avoiding adulthood, seeking attention, punishing my parents for something unnamed, making my problems my personality, and, her personal favorite, delivered at a 4th of July barbecue 2 years after my diagnosis, loudly enough for my aunt to hear, using that chair like a prop. The chair was not a prop. The chair was a medical device that allowed me to attend 4th of July barbecues instead of staying home. The chair was the thing that gave me back hours of energy I used to spend simply trying to remain upright, energy I redirected into my patients, my friendships, my garden, my life. The chair was the best decision Dr. Webb and I ever made together, and my mother hated it with a specificity that told me everything I needed to know about what she actually found threatening. She never hated the illness. She hated the evidence of it. I met Daniel at a continuing education conference 4 years ago. He is a physical therapist, which meant he understood immediately and completely in ways I had stopped expecting from people. On our second date, he asked me detailed questions about my treatment protocol and then listened to the answers without trying to fix anything or offer alternatives he'd read about online. I cried in the car on the way home, not from sadness but from the specific relief of being treated like an expert on my own body. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He proposed in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, while I was repotting one of my balcony tomatoes and wearing clothes I would have been embarrassed to be seen in publicly. He said he'd been waiting for a moment when I wasn't trying to be anything in particular, because that was the version of me he wanted to promise himself to. I said yes before he finished the sentence. My mother's response when we told her, "Are you sure he knows what he's signing up for?" Daniel smiled at her with the precise, professional calm of a man who has spent a decade helping people through pain. "I do," he said. "That's actually the whole point of what we're doing." She did not find this charming. Over the following 8 months of wedding planning, my mother inserted herself in the ways she always had, not through direct confrontation but through erosion. Small comments about the wheelchair and the venue's aesthetics. Questions about whether guests would be uncomfortable with certain accommodations. A phone call 2 weeks before the wedding suggesting with elaborate casualness that I might want to consider walking just the aisle, since everyone would be watching, and it would be such a special moment. When I told her I'd walk the aisle when my neurologist cleared me to do so and not a moment before, she went quiet in a way that meant she was storing the disagreement rather than releasing it. I should have known she was planning something. Josephine warned me. Josephine has known my mother for 10 years and has what I would describe as a forensic understanding of her patterns. 2 days before the wedding, over tea in my hotel room, Jo said, "She's going to do something at the ceremony. I don't know what. But she's been too quiet." I told Jo she was projecting. I told Jo that whatever my mother's feelings, she would not disrupt my wedding in front of 87 people and a pastor she went to church with. Josephine gave me the look she gives me when she is being patient with my optimism. He was right. I was wrong. I should update the record on this. Dr. Marcus Webb had been my neurologist for 9 years. He is 61 years old, silver-haired, precise in his speech, and possessed of a particular kind of stillness that I have come to associate with people who have spent decades in rooms where the news is often bad. He does not offer false comfort. He does not minimize. In our first appointment, when I was 23 and terrified and sitting across from him with a folder of test results that had just redefined my life, he looked at me for a long moment and then said, "This is a hard diagnosis. You're going to have a hard year. I'm going to tell you everything I know and then we're going to make a plan." I have been making plans with Marcus Webb ever since. He came to my wedding because I invited him. Not out of sentimentality, though there is sentiment. You do not spend 9 years navigating a chronic illness with someone without sentiment accumulating. I invited him because Daniel and I had decided that the people at our wedding would be people who had actually shown up for us, in the real and specific sense of that phrase, and Marcus Webb had shown up. He had called me back on a Sunday evening when my vision went in my right eye. He had adjusted my treatment 3 times over 9 years as my condition evolved. He had written the letter to my employer during a bad relapse that protected my job and my health insurance simultaneously. He had, on one occasion I do not speak about often, talked me off a ledge that was not metaphorical. A conversation I had called him for at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night when the weight of the diagnosis felt unsurvivable, and he had stayed on the phone for 40 minutes without once making me feel like a burden. He was seated in the 3rd row on the groom's side in a dark charcoal suit. His wife Eleanor was beside him. They had driven up from Portland that morning. He was not supposed to be part of what happened next. None of us were. The ceremony began at 2 o'clock. I waited in the vestibule with my father, who had managed, over the years, to fall somewhere between my mother's position and mine, not defending me exactly but not attacking me either, existing in the middle space of a man who had long ago decided that conflict avoidance was its own form of loyalty. He looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo. He looked more uncomfortable about what was coming, though I did not know that yet. The processional music started. Through the doors, I could hear the shuffle of 87 people rising to their feet. I could hear Daniel somewhere at the front of the chapel and I thought about his face, which is one of my reliable steadying thoughts. The specific way he looks when he is concentrating on something he cares about, the small line between his brows, the absolute focus. I thought, I get to marry that face in 4 minutes. My mother appeared. She came from the side door from the family staging area, moving with the particular velocity she gets when she has decided on a course of action. She was in the pale blue dress she'd agonized over for 6 months. Her hair was set. She looked, from a distance, like any mother of the bride looks on her daughter's wedding day, composed and emotional and proud. She walked directly to my wheelchair and grabbed the handles. "Give me a moment," she said to my father, who stepped back. To me, in a voice pitched low enough that only those closest could hear, "You are walking down this aisle." Mom kept my voice level. "Let go of the handles. This is your wedding day. You are going to walk." She began pulling the chair backward, away from the doors. "Get up. Mom. Walk down that aisle yourself or don't bother." Her voice cracked open, louder now, past the threshold of the private. Heads turned near the entrance. The wedding coordinator, a woman named Patrice, appeared in the doorway with an expression of frozen horror. "You've embarrassed this family long enough. Get up and walk like a normal person." "Barbara." My father's voice. Useless as it had always been useless. My mother yanked the wheelchair backward. Hard. The angle was wrong. She pulled at a diagonal and the chair tilted, and I had no warning, and I was on the floor. The stone floor of Hartwell Chapel vestibule is cold, even through ivory lace. I know this now. Dina was somewhere behind me. Josephine was already seated inside, not yet knowing. My father was making a sound that was not quite a word. My mother was saying something I could not hear because the sound had gone strange and distant, the way it does sometimes when my body is processing something it wasn't prepared for. And then the door to the chapel opened. Later, Josephine would tell me that from inside it looked like a pause in the music. A hesitation. And then she saw, through the open door, that I was on the floor. And she said she stood up. And then she said she saw Marcus Webb, already standing, already moving, his phone in his hand, and she sat back down because she recognized the look on his face, and she knew. She told me that it was handled. Dr. Marcus Webb came through that door, crossed the vestibule in 6 steps, and crouched beside me. He did a rapid assessment with the efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Eyes, response, orientation. "Claire, are you injured?" "I don't think so." My voice was steadier than I expected. "My hip. Maybe. Don't move yet." He stood. He turned to face my mother. She was still holding the wheelchair handles. She had not, I think, fully processed what had happened. There was something collapsed in her expression, something that might have been the first moment she understood that she had put her daughter on the floor of a church. Dr. Webb held up his phone. "I'm Dr. Marcus Webb. I'm Claire's neurologist. I've been her treating physician for 9 years." His voice was not raised. It was the voice he uses in examination rooms when he is delivering information that has weight. "I've recorded the last 45 seconds on this phone. What you just did constitutes physical assault of a disabled person under Oregon statute." The vestibule had gone entirely silent. Through the open chapel doors, I could see 87 people who had stood for the processional, now standing for something else entirely, facing the wrong direction. My mother said, "I just wanted her to." "I'm going to need you to step back from the wheelchair," Dr. Webb said. 8 words. Quiet. Absolute. She stepped back. What happened in the next 20 minutes is something I have replayed many times, not to punish myself with it, but because I am still, I think, understanding what it meant. Dina and Dr. Webb helped me from the floor. My hip was bruised but functional. Eleanor Webb appeared with the quiet competence of someone who has spent 40 years married to a neurologist and has learned to prepare for unexpected things. She had a travel ice pack from her purse, which she pressed gently against my hip while Dina straightened my dress. Josephine materialized from inside the chapel, having apparently decided that 3 minutes was the maximum she could wait without information, and took up a position beside me that communicated, without words, that nothing further was going to happen to me while she was present. Daniel had been told by the pastor to wait at the altar. He was waiting. I knew this because Josephine had sent his best man a text that said, "She's okay. Stay with him. She's coming." My mother sat in a chair against the vestibule wall. My father stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. Dr. Webb spoke quietly with the wedding coordinator, and then with a woman I recognized as someone from the venue's event management, explaining, I learned later, that there was documentation of an incident and that he would be contacting the venue's legal department the following week. The coordinator, Patrice, was writing things down. I watched my mother from across the vestibule. This is the part that stays with me longest, longer than the anger, longer than the pain of the floor. She looked small. Not pitiful, I want to be precise about this, but reduced. Like the structure she had built around her beliefs about me had, in 45 seconds of video on a neurologist's phone, been demonstrated to be unsound. She was sitting inside the rubble of it, and I think she knew it, and I do not know if that knowing was the beginning of anything or simply the moment before she rebuilt the same structure somewhere else. I do not know yet. That's the honest answer. Dr. Webb came back to me. How are you feeling? Realistically, my hip is going to hurt tomorrow. I looked at the chapel doors. I want to get married. He almost smiled. Then let's get you married. We delayed the ceremony by 18 minutes. The pastor made a quiet announcement to the guests. A brief medical pause, everyone please be seated, the ceremony would begin shortly. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that still moves me when I think about it, is how completely the guests complied. 87 people sat down and waited, and when the doors opened again and the processional music restarted, they stood back up, and the sound of them rising was one of the kindest sounds I have ever heard. Daniel was at the altar. I had been right about his face. The look he gave me when the doors opened, I am not sure I have the words for it. It was not relief exactly, though relief was in it. It was something older and steadier than relief. It was the look of a man who had chosen this completely, including this, and was not surprised by this, and was still there at the end of the aisle waiting. I wheeled myself down. My arms were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Josephine was in the front row with tears streaming, making no effort to stop them, which is very Josephine. My aunt, my father's sister, who has always been kind, reached out and touched my hand as I passed. When I reached Daniel, he crouched down so we were eye level, the way he always does, and he took both my hands and he said quietly, I heard you hit the floor. I'm okay, I said. I know you are. He squeezed my hands. You always are. I just needed you to know I heard it. We were married at 2:31 p.m. on October 14th. The ceremony was exactly as we had planned it. The readings we'd chosen, the vows we'd written ourselves, the song Josephine sang that made 3/4 of the room cry. When the pastor pronounced us married and Daniel kissed me, the room erupted, and I felt the sound of it in my chest like something being returned to me. My mother did not stay for the reception. She and my father left during the 18-minute delay. I learned this from Patrice, who told me quietly before I entered the reception hall that my parents had departed and that Dr. Webb's documentation had been formally noted in the venue's incident report. I sat with that information for a moment. I looked at the reception hall through the window, the round tables with their white linens and the candles I'd agonized over, and the photo display Josephine had assembled from my childhood through the present, which I had not actually seen yet and which I would cry over later when Daniel pointed out she had found a photo of me at 8 years old holding a tomato plant. I had imagined this night differently. I had, despite everything, despite 9 years of evidence, despite Josephine's warnings, maintained some small stubborn version of a future in which my mother and I sat at the same table and she looked at my husband and my friends and my life and understood something she had refused to understand before. I had not admitted this to myself, but it had been there, the way these things are always there even when we know better. It was not going to happen tonight. I understood that now. I do not know if it will happen. I genuinely do not know. My mother and I have not spoken since the wedding. It has been 4 months as I write this. My father calls every 2 weeks and the calls are careful and circular and do not arrive anywhere, but they happen, which is something. My sister Tricia flew in from Dallas for the wedding, left before the reception, and sent me a text the following day that said only, I'm sorry I didn't do more. I don't know what to do with her either. I wrote back, I know. Me neither. It was the most honest exchange we had managed in years. Dr. Marcus Webb filed a formal incident report with the Oregon Adult Protective Services, as he was legally required to do as a mandated reporter. He also provided his video documentation to a family law attorney I consulted in November, not because I have decided what I want to do with it, but because I want to have the option. I am still deciding. This is one of the things that did not resolve, that will not resolve cleanly, that I am carrying forward into a life that is otherwise, genuinely, in ways I did not always believe possible, good. The reception was extraordinary. I am going to say that plainly without qualification. It was one of the best nights of my life. The food was excellent. The toasts were funny and true. Josephine's toast was 7 minutes long and included a visual aid, a laminated photograph of me at the continuing education conference where I met Daniel, with an arrow drawn and marker pointing to my expression captioned, "She doesn't know yet." The room lost its mind. Daniel laughed so hard he had to put down his champagne glass. My colleague Renata, who has worked beside me for 5 years and who came alone because she is newly divorced and was nervous about it, danced until midnight. My best patient. I am not supposed to have a best patient, but I do. An 11-year-old named Marcus who is recovering from a spinal injury and who sends me drawings of his progress, had sent a card via his mother that was waiting at my seat. A crayon drawing of a woman in a wheelchair and a man standing beside her, and above them the words, in the large uncertain letters of an 11-year-old, "Congratulations Emrys. Okafor, the best OT." Daniel and I danced twice. The first time to the song we had chosen for months. The second time to something the DJ played near the end of the night, a slow song I didn't recognize, and Daniel just wheeled my chair onto the floor and stood beside it, and we held hands and swayed, and Josephine watched from the edge of the room with her arms crossed and her expression doing several things at once, and I thought, this is what I have. This is what is real. I want to tell you what the last 4 months have looked like because I think it matters. Daniel and I spent our honeymoon in New Mexico, which was his idea and the correct idea. Low altitude, accessible trails, excellent food, and the kind of light that does something specific to the landscape in the evenings that I found genuinely restorative. My hip healed fully within 10 days. I had one minor flare in December, managed at home with rest and my existing medication protocol, and called Dr. Webb's office as a precaution. He called me back within 2 hours, as he always does. I returned to work in November and have taken on 2 new patients, both of them teenagers with conditions that require the particular combination of medical knowledge and human patience that I have spent 9 years developing in myself, first by necessity and then by choice. Working with them is, on most days, the best part of my day. My garden has tomatoes again. They are not quite good enough yet. They are closer. Josephine is getting a promotion at the architecture firm where she works, and I am trying to convince her to celebrate in a way that doesn't involve her downplaying it, which is her primary mode. We have a standing Sunday call that has not missed a week in 7 years. The legal situation with my mother is unresolved. This is the part of the story that does not have an ending yet, and I have decided to stop pretending otherwise. What I know is this: there is documentation. There is a neurologist who is also a mandated reporter and who does not equivocate. There is a family law attorney who has looked at the video and said words that I am not yet ready to repeat. There is a question I am living with about what accountability looks like and what I want it to look like and whether those are the same thing. I have been asking Dr. Webb about this, not as my doctor but as someone who has seen the shape of my life from close range for 9 years. He does not tell me what to do. He is not that kind of person. He said in our last appointment, sitting across from me in the same exam room where he delivered my diagnosis in 2015, "Whatever you decide, it should be what gives you the life you want to be living. Not what punishes them. Not what absolves them. What gives you your life." I'm thinking about that. The thing I want to say at the end of this, the thing I spent a long time not knowing how to say, is that the wedding was not saved by the moment. The moment mattered. Dr. Webb standing up mattered. The documentation matters. The legal accountability matters, whatever form it ultimately takes. But the wedding was saved by everything that came before the moment. It was saved by 9 years of appointments and honest conversations and treatment plans built on the truth of my condition rather than someone else's comfort with it. It was saved by Josephine driving 4 hours in a snowstorm. It was saved by Daniel asking me detailed questions on our second date and then listening to the answers. It was saved by Dina, who traveled from Portland with an ice pack she probably didn't think she'd need, and by Renata, who danced until midnight, and by an 11-year-old named Marcus who drew me a crayon picture, and by my aunt who touched my hand as I wheeled past her, and by 87 people who sat back down and waited and then stood back up when the music started again. It was saved by every choice I made over 9 years, to build a life around people who treated my reality as real. My mother called it embarrassing. She spent years calling it embarrassing. I have been thinking these past 4 months about what I would say to her if she called, and what I have arrived at is this: there was never anything embarrassing about it. There was only ever something true. And the truth of it, the wheelchair, the diagnosis, the ice packs and the bad days and the tomatoes that aren't quite good enough yet, has given me the exact life I am living. I would not trade it. Not even the floor. Not even the floor. If you're navigating a chronic illness alongside people who don't believe you, I want you to know, the disbelief is not diagnosis. Keep your records. Keep your doctors. Keep the people who show up. Build your life around what is true, not around what is convenient for someone else to believe. And if someone ever tries to tell you that your wheelchair is a prop, I hope you have a Marcus Webb in the third row.